Good morning, everyone, and welcome along to the Blood Red Morning Bulletin. I'm your host for today, Patrick Smith, and I'm joined today by Liverpool.com's James Martin. James, how's things?
Yeah, all good, thanks. Good to be back on the pod. Been away for a week and a bit now, so nice to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on, James. We've got a couple of transfer rumours then to get you straight back into the fray with. Let's start with the first one, shall we? It's a centre-back, again, another left-sided centre-back. I think he's right-footed but plays on the left. Very rapid. It's Perr Schuurs, former Ajax Academy graduate, I believe. I don't think he's an Academy graduate. I think he played for Ajax. Moved to Torino last summer. James, this seems to be the latest centre-back link with a move to Liverpool. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it seems like probably a more realistic one than a couple of the names that have been floating around. I mean, the sort of tone from journalists for much of the summer has been kind of, if we do get a centre-back, it'll be for that sort of initial, maybe fourth choice even role. And, you know, they're going to be young with high ceiling, but maybe wouldn't necessarily be knocking on the door to start every game straight away. And, you know, it's hard to say whether Perr Schuurs falls into that category, but he's probably on the cusp of it. He is still very young. And, you know, he hasn't played for a proper, like, top-tier club just yet. You don't want to disrespect, obviously, Ajax and then Torino. You know, he's been playing in top leagues and you know, top clubs. But there's a step up again, which I think, still being a young player as well, he would probably appreciate. He doesn't seem like someone who'd come in and would immediately demand to be, you know, starting alongside Van Dijk or even, you know, supplanting Van Dijk, given that, you know, he is that, like you say, comfortable on the left type figure. So, yeah, it does seem like probably a more realistic option than someone like, you know, Levi Colwill, who's obviously been mentioned a lot in recent weeks. That's going to take huge sums if indeed Chelsea are open to selling him at all. And that never really seemed like what Liverpool were hoping to do with the centre-back department this summer. I mean, we do want to be planning for the future, but at the same time, we have Van Dijk and Konate as, you know, a very strong starting pair still. It's unlikely whoever comes in is going to be disrupting that, you know, within the next year. So really, it is a depth signing, maybe with an eye on the future, because, you know, Van Dijk's just turned 32, so we do need that eye on the future. But yeah, it's a tough balance to strike, because whoever comes in probably isn't going to be playing straight away, and maybe Perr Schuurs is someone who kind of strikes that right balance.
I mean, it's interesting you bring up the depth, because that's the main talking point here. Because obviously Liverpool are going to be signing him as a backup centre-back. Now, he's going to have to compete, obviously, with Joel Matip, who probably looks like he's on the way out next summer anyway, and maybe even Joe Gomez. He's 23, James. I mean, that is still obviously relatively young, but let's say he's not exactly going to get much game time this year. By the time he's playing, you know, next season, he could actually be 25. I mean, is he actually young enough for Liverpool to be going for? That sounds quite crazy to talk of a 23-year-old, but in terms of the depth, I mean, his game time, he's going to be challenged by Joel Matip. He's going to want to have a bit of a swan song in his final Liverpool season, isn't he?
Yeah, but I think players, as a general rule, tend to back themselves. He'd probably be looking at the situation at Liverpool and thinking, you know, I can at the very least get myself up to third in this pecking order. You mentioned Matip, you mentioned Gomez, that they're both sort of not there for the taking. That's, you know, that's disrespectful for two players who have still been, you know, for the most part, very good. But, you know, you mentioned Matip's age. That's definitely a factor. Gomez, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him get a few more minutes at right back this season with, you know, all of the changes to the shape and everything. It depends what Klopp wants to do with Alexander-Arnold, but that's an option there in certain games if he wants to move him forward, but still keep an actual defensive-minded right back there. So, you know, maybe we see him sort of slowly coming out of the rotation in terms of the centre-backs, especially if a new one does come through the door. So I think he'd probably look at it and think, you know, there's potential minutes to be had as soon as this season, particularly when you look at the injury records. I mean, Van Dijk's obviously had that long serious one, but mostly been fine after that. But you look at all three of the other ones, and you kind of have to call them all injury prone to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Matt, you know, goes without saying. Konate, you know, he got through most of the first season more or less fine, but obviously he wasn't the first choice for a lot of that. Matip was, and you know, since the game time demands have gone up a bit, we've seen, you know, a recurrence of those kind of niggling problems we saw at Leipzig as well. So I think you put him into the same category, and obviously Joe Gomez as well is not a stranger to an injury. So yeah, you're coming in as maybe fourth choice, but you're also looking at it and thinking, I'm not too far away from game time here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's a really similar profile to the other centre-backs we've seen linked as well. I mean, that left side of centre-back, he's 6'3". By all accounts, he's absolutely rapid, similar to Mickey van der Ven. He seems really similar, actually, to Van der Ven for me. But, I mean, the thing is, he's not exactly a top-name centre-back. It maybe hints that they'll be looking at other signings in midfield, which hopefully they'll make, and maybe a right-back. But then his price, James, there's reports that Crystal Palace, I think it says here, they've made an offer of 35 million. The Echo reported yesterday that he's now one step away. But apparently things have changed today, according to Football Insider. I mean, at 35 million, let's say that Crystal Palace bid is true. Would you be, tempted by that, or would you be maybe looking elsewhere for that sort of money?
I think I'd probably still just about be tempted. I mean, we've got to sort of acknowledge that the market has moved on even in the last couple of years. And if you're looking for a player who's genuinely going to be a contender to, take over from someone like Van Dijk within the next, 2 to 3 years, you're not going to get it for much cheaper, I don't think. I mean, there's maybe ways of doing it. If there's a fortuitous release clause, we've seen Liverpool make the most of good release clauses already this summer. But if those aren't around on the players you want, then you do have to pay that premium, particularly when you're looking at players who, I mean, obviously he's not left-footed, but who you think can play in that left-sided role. They are rarer than the ones who are comfortable on the right. So, I mean, you just need to look at the figures being bandied about for Colwill to see that. Obviously, he's got the added advantage of being homegrown. But yeah, I think you struggle to pay much less than that for someone who's got a legitimate chance of actually breaking into the Liverpool team. Of course, Liverpool could say we don't want to spend that much on the fourth choice, because that is another valid way of looking at it, and they buy someone else who's not necessarily slated to take over in the long run, and is just a depth signing to tide things over until a bigger spend in the defence in a year or two. But I wouldn't really see the point of that, because if that was how they wanted to do things, we've been saying it for a while, but Nat Phillips is still on the books. He's not an awful option. You look at him; he hasn't actually really let Liverpool down when he's been called upon. So if Liverpool did just want that emergency figure, then they'd be keeping Nat Phillips for yet another transfer window, which would be a bit unfair on him. Like, it feels like he's deserved a move for a couple of years now. But yeah, it's I think whoever Liverpool signs, they will want to be someone who at least has a chance of growing into a first team role, and that means spending fairly serious money.
Yeah, I agree in the principle that that money needs to be spent on this young centre-back. I'm not sure, though, that Perr Schuurs is the one. I mean, just on a quick look at his Wikipedia, he's not been capped by the Netherlands yet, but then that's fair enough, because they've got a plethora of amazing centre-backs, haven't they? So you can't exactly discredit him for that one. But I'd maybe go for someone who's maybe got a little bit more experience at that age. I mean, Gonzalo Inacio, I think, has played a lot more games. He's got caps for Portugal. I mean, Van der Ven looks pretty decent as well. I don't think Perr Schuurs is the one I'd personally be looking at. But then, of course, who am I to say that? What do I actually know? Let's move on then anyway, shall we, to our next transfer rumour. It's Khephren Thuram again. I don't want to use the word, but I'm going to use the word saga. L'Équipe have reported that the France youngster is now likely to remain put at Nice, James. Now, what do you make of this one? A bit of a turn in this tale, isn't it? I mean, do you think Liverpool have potentially missed out on a player who could be massive for their midfield rebuild?
I don't think so. I think if we hadn't got Szoboszlai, then I'd be looking at it and thinking, why is this not moved on? Why aren't we going for him? But he's another one who's more comfortable in that number 8 role. He doesn't really play any deeper than that. So I think there's a reason why Liverpool were sort of stalling on these links, not necessarily stalling, but these same links were sort of surfacing for a while and not really moving anywhere. You had Thuram, didn't you? You had Gabriel Vega. You could even throw maybe Gravenberch into the same category. And it did always feel to me like these were players Liverpool were legitimately looking at, but sort of if they couldn't get someone who they liked even more. And, Szoboszlai came a bit out of left field. I didn't realise he would be that player, but given that he came with a much more premium price tag, given that he's so highly rated, I think probably he was that player. And I'm not at all surprised to see Thuram and Gabriel Vega as well. I think it was Romano said we've backed away from that one. So I think it's no surprise at all to see those kind of links maybe fading back a bit now. I'm surprised if he does stay at Nice, though, because he did look like a very good player. And, it seemed like he'd get a move this summer, whether it's Liverpool or somewhere else. So I suppose that would be a bit of a surprise. But I'm not too surprised it's not Liverpool.
Yeah, just having a quick check there. Nice finished 9th in the league. I don't think they won Toulouse on the French Cup, so I don't think they're playing in Europe next season. It's a really strange decision from him to stay if that is the case. yeah, they keep reporting that he's likely to move next summer, not this one. But I mean, on yesterday's show, James, we were talking about the number 6 role in Romeo Lavia and how that could impact Bajsetic's game. In the number 8 role, then, they've just signed Alexis McAllister, who probably is going to play as that 8. They've also got lots of other players who can play in that role, as it looks like Szoboszlai will become the starter on the right-hand side. Do you think they'll sign another player in those advanced midfield positions, or do you think McAllister and Szoboszlai now have sort of completed that area? Because they've got a few options of depth there now, haven't they?
Yeah, I think it's probably unlikely. I think if they did sign another number 8, it would be a kind of versatile number 8 who also can do number 6. But the thing is, McAllister kind of falls into that bracket as well. So I suppose it really hinges on what Klopp thinks he's going to do with McAllister. I mean, when they signed him, he talked up the versatility, how he played in a lot of midfield roles. So if we did sign the number 8, I'd start to be more inclined to think maybe Liverpool are thinking about playing McAllister a little bit deeper. But, you know, that would be a real departure, because much as he has been good in that role, he's not a destroyer of the kind of Fabinho mould. And that's obviously been central to how Liverpool have played, you know, for most of the peak Klopp era. So, yeah, I think, I mean, if it was me, I'd definitely be looking at a number 6 now. I'd say, okay, we're happy with the number 8 role, particularly with, you know, Curtis Jones enjoying that resurgence at the end of the last season and really looking like he's maturing into that role. I think I'd be happy enough to say we're done there, you know, especially if Thiago doesn't move on either. He's another one who can play there. So I'd be happy enough with that. And then the number 6, I'd be signing someone, because really it's Fabinho who, question marks remain. He did look better at the end of last season, but that's with the caveat of the fact that Trent Alexander-Arnold was dropping in to help him out. Bajsetic is really, really promising, but we saw what happened when we overused him last year. He's a young player still developing, and he got injured, which was not really a great surprise. So, yeah, I'd rather have someone in between those two who can challenge Fabinho.
Go on, James, give us a name.
Yeah, I mean, Lavia does look like a good fit, doesn't he? He can. He's most comfortable at 6. He can play a bit further forward, so he, you know, gives that versatility that Klopp likes, but would primarily come in and challenge Fabinho for that role. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I do think there'll be a premium attached just for any number of reasons. But again, there's the homegrown factor. And there's competition. You know, you look at the players Liverpool have signed so far, they've been not quite free runs, but it's always seemed like Liverpool have been in the driver's seat for those deals, whereas this one seems like more of an open race. So I'm not hugely confident of it happening, but I think of the names to have come out so far, he'd be a high up my list.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I agree that I think that's the role I'd be signing for now. I think the other two midfield positions are pretty solid with the options, but maybe they need a 6 deal between Bajsetic and Fabinho. I'm not personally sure that Lavia is the right person at 35, 40 million, maybe even upwards of that, to be honest. I mean, I've done a bit of research this past week, and I'm just not entirely convinced by it. I'm going to die on this hill. I'm still like, you know, the minority in this camp, but I'm really not sure. But then I don't have a backup choice for who else it could be. But I'm sure one will maybe emerge as these transfer rumours continue throughout the summer. And make sure everyone that you're with us every weekday at 10 a.m, because we'll be talking through all of the latest Liverpool FC transfer rumours right here on the Blood Red channel and Liverpool.com, Facebook and Twitter. And make sure as well you keep across the Liverpool Echo site and the Liverpool.com site for the brilliant articles from our writers like James to keep up to date with all the latest Liverpool FC news, transfers and other stories as well. But for now, we'll catch you again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you then.